Are you ready to up-level your performance, become a better sales coach, and grow revenue?
Are you ready to be ready?
Then ready, set, sell.
I'm Hannah, a B2B sales enthusiast and sales consultant, advocating for sales to be a little more human.
And I'm Tony from Mindtickle, where I'm a sales leader and coach.
And you're listening to Ready, Set, Sell, a podcast dedicated to helping revenue and sales professionals like you adopt a sales readiness approach to ensure your team is always ready to win.
In each episode, we share smart insights, tangible advice, and actionable tips that can be applied directly to the work you do every day to drive organizational growth.
Let's dive into the episode.
For a business to be effective, all teams need to work synergistically together and avoid operating in silos.
But there are two specific teams that need to work together now more than ever: sales and marketing.
Absolutely. And I think to optimize outcomes and meet or exceed sales targets, sales and marketing teams need to be in constant communication and strongly aligned on their end goals.
Aligning on desired outcomes, strategies, and tactics is key to success in today's constantly shifting landscape.
And today's guest, who I happen to know, has an intimate awareness of the need for alignment between sales and marketing teams.
And I know him too. Chris Lynch is the CMO of Mindtickle, and he's here today to discuss how sales and marketing teams can come together to reach targets and optimize outcomes.
So thanks for listening, and Chris, welcome to the show.
We really wanted to start by understanding a bit more about your career background so far, but really more specifically, the things that have happened in your career that really helped you level up, that were like a catalyst for change.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. So I've been a chief marketing officer for about 6 years now, and I still like to call myself a product marketer in a CMO shoes, but that was really never part of the plan initially. Way back when I wanted to be a journalist, way before I got into sales and marketing. So if you had asked me back when I was 22 if this is what I'd be doing, I'm not sure what I would have said if I'd said, oh, you're going to be an executive of a high growth tech company. And so, I think that, just from a background standpoint, I got my start in journalism and was working for a company called IDG, International Data Group. And it was a really great experience because I just started covering tech companies and started asking lots of questions from, at the time, a kid who had never really worked in business. So a lot of what I was doing was just sort of learning by observation. And IDG let me at the time move out to San Francisco because at the time there were these more novel companies coming out, companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And, I ended up sort of falling into business through happenstance. I started covering those companies and was really sure, actually, I remember that I wanted to do PR. I was really sure I wanted to work at Google. And I remember going to interview there. I interviewed with 8 people. And I found out that 7 out of the 8 of them liked me, but one was a hard no. But it ended up being this really serendipitous moment because I was driving around in the valley that day and I went and met up with a guy named Ross Mayfield. And he said, hey, look, I think you'd really have a bright future here. And what was cool about it was it wasn't necessarily great for the company, but it was great for me. Social text was one of those cautionary tales of being super early to a market. Your funding is kind of starting to draw down as everyone else's is sort of ramping up, even though you had the idea a few years earlier. But for a kid who was 24, it was an incredible opportunity because I got to work in sort of all facets of marketing because we were a lean team where you had to do a lot. Most importantly, and what kind of set the pace for my career moving forward was that there were 2 groups that I really enjoyed sitting in the middle of. So my cube that I was sitting at was right next to the bullpen for sales. So I was listening to them every single day pitch companies, and you'd listen to some of them just loop pretty much the same narrative as they're cold calling and doing the outreach. Yeah. And I could tell, even without being able to hear other people on the other side of the phone, what was going to be successful and what wasn't. So I talked a lot with them. And then I also spent this other part of my day with the product and engineers. And I sort of applied my skills that I had had as a journalist of saying, hey, explain to me what you're working on. What are you doing? And then I would sort of put that into plain English into our marketing material. So lo and behold, that kind of got my career off on a track of product marketing that ended up being sort of where I ended up landing in the marketing function.
I love the fact that you heard so many conversations that you could start to tell what was actually happening based on just hearing that over and over again.
What really brought you from, Northeastern to, you mentioned some great stuff in your background there, but you're from Northeastern into, sales is absolutely where I want to be, and, marketing and bringing all that together. Can you go a little bit further on that and tell us a little bit more how you really got there and what brought you there?
There was two, I guess, answers to that. The more pragmatic one is I was probably just going to go broke living in San Francisco as a journalist. It was, I had a lot of fun in those years. It's so weird. You go back when you want for certain things, but you look back on that time and said, yeah, I still ended up having a ton of fun during that time. And then you actually get all those things later in life, and life becomes complicated for all the different reasons.
You tend to have a lot more fun when you're broke, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And so, for me, I think it really was about, I looked at sales and marketing as another opportunity for storytelling, but doing so in a way where I felt the challenge of persuading people was even harder. Because essentially they know you're trying to sell them something. There was an inherent challenge to the idea of walking into a room and convincing someone that I could really fundamentally shift their business and kind of push them into a different stratosphere with what they were doing. Moreover, like once you sell and provided you're working on a product you believe in and you see that come to fruition, for me, that was a really cool sensation to see that early on in my career. I also thought that being sort of at that cross section where you have like the product and engineering on one side of the house, and then you have all the external go-to-market functions on the other, having that context to understand both audiences and help sort of triangulate some of the different types of considerations that people have in a growing business, that was really fun for me. I just started to enjoy it. So I think originally it started out of some basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then, as you start climbing up the pyramid a little bit, some of the work just became more intellectually interesting to me.
Got it. No, that's awesome.
I love that you mentioned the hierarchy of needs, because I'm thinking, okay, so you've been at Mindtickle for, is it approaching a year now?
Almost a year. Yeah, it's gone by quick.
It has. And I'm thinking, I wonder where he is now on that pyramid. But that may not be the place to talk about it. But I'd love you to go into some detail about how you landed the role at Mindtickle, and really, what drew you to the company, and did you have a giggle when you first heard the name?
I didn't have a giggle when I first heard the name, because at this point with tech companies, I feel like I've seen everything at a certain point. So I feel like my progression to Mindtickle started actually back when I was at Oracle. I ran global product marketing for the Marketing Cloud business unit. They were pulling in companies like Eloqua, Responsys, all these different players in the marketing space. They were pulling it all together. And there, my job was really to be the chief storyteller. It was figuring out, even ahead of product and engineering, being able to integrate all those products together into one offering. How do you at least make it sound like a cohesive thing? And so I did that, and then I became CMO of a company called Cision, which is in the PR software market. Similar deal. They had been acquiring companies like PR Newswire, a slew of different software providers that focus on PR professionals. And again, it was, how do you pull all of these things together into a cohesive story? With Mindtickle, there were really two things that drew me. One was at Mindtickle, we also have a very comprehensive product that in many ways, depending on the eye of the beholder of who's looking at the market, kind of spans a number of different sub-markets in the RevTech space. But really what drew me to the company, because I was lucky enough to have some different options, was that I've lived this problem before that Mindtickle's trying to solve.
You know, you have obviously a very diverse background. You've said some great things about the companies that you've worked at. What would you say, though, are some of the qualities that you think you have that have really contributed to bringing you to where you are right now? I think I have some ideas. I'm sure Hannah does as well, but it's always interesting to hear how someone thinks about themselves and their own qualities.
Yeah, always a tough one. But if I were to sum it up for me, I think it would be in a few key areas. One is that I'm honest and direct, but I think marketers spend too much time using their positioning and messaging skills internally. And what I would say is that it's really save that for when you're out in the market competing. Leave it all out in the field when you're in the market and do the best job you can to position effectively. But I think internally, particularly when you're dealing with sales, it's really important to be honest and direct. Be truthful for where you are with your performance and the numbers, where you're still gapped and where you're seeing challenges. Another key quality for me is that as much as I really do, I consider myself a humble person. I do feel like I'm on top of my game from like a storytelling perspective. I'm probably peaking at my ability to tell great stories and make compelling messaging. I feel like if you gave me any of our competitor products, I could probably in a very short period of time build a really compelling pitch from it, even more effective than what they might be doing. And that's all respect to the CMOs of my competitors. Some of them have skills that I could never dream of having, and they're incredible at. But I think that I know that I'm very good at that. And I think the third thing I'd say is I'm always in it for the team and the company. And I do feel like that's a little bit in this kind of data-driven modern world, plus coupled with all the individual empowerment that is so encouraged now in the business world. Like I'm a little bit of a company man, to be honest. I don't apply for awards or I don't need all that kind of extra stuff. For me, the biggest satisfaction is just seeing the company be successful.
Just going back to the conversation we're having before, you were talking about your core skill set and your superpowers. We're talking a little bit about positioning and working on the brand. What other things do you have in the pipeline that you're working on, and from a marketing perspective, and what overarching goals are there actually helping to drive towards?
I think there's a few things that we have going right now. I'm really thinking through what the next version of our digital experience looks like for our prospects and making that as compelling as possible. Tony's probably heard me mention this internally at like one of the town halls, but like I feel like selling went through this phase of, first there was the relationship sale, then there was the value sell. And you can really date yourself in the sales community based on kind of what you say you believe in a little bit. So it's like the value sell kind of worked its way like even through the 90s where you kind of had the 3 martini lunch things. And then you had the early 2000s was all about the value sell, like how much value are you business value are you demonstrating to your customer? I feel like we've moved into the era of the insight sell, where it's actually not enough to just sort of say, oh, like I can provide value for you. The odds are in a lot of these more mature markets, there are multiple companies that can provide more or less a similar value. I think it's more like, can you tell a prospect something interesting or something that they haven't thought of? So as I think about our marketing for that, for me, it kind of comes down to, can we provide experiences that helps our prospect deliver more insight inside of their companies? So we've been really advocating for this ideal rep profile concept, right? All marketers have ideal customer profiles. Sales leaders should have an ideal rep profile. We're working through basically a digital experience where people can come to our site, give us some interesting information about their organization, and then kind of turn back at least a first introductory perspective on what their ideal rep profile could be. So we're really looking to make compelling content experiences that help prospects have that insight. So I think that's one key thing we're really focused on right now. I'd say the other thing is, like a lot of marketing shops in B2B right now, I think we're working hard to sort of rationalize what the mechanics of an ideal funnel look like. I think the emergence of account-based marketing has, really created a fervor within the B2B marketing community for a while, because I feel like for a lot of folks, particularly those who had worked in the demand side of the house for a while, it ended up being this like interesting change of the goalpost. If you had been working in the demand and found the grind of just generating leads to be a bear, it's nice to just flip the script and change the narrative and say, oh, well, it's actually, there's an addressable market of accounts here that we should go after. I think that for me, intent models and some of that stuff that the ABM providers have are very interesting. They're nice guidelines as to like where you want to go in market. But I also think that, staying very true to the persona you're trying to reach in market, understanding that you are still going to find some people, even with all the targeting we have, you're still going to have people who come to your site who we can really solve a problem for them. And I want to make sure that our system is flexible enough to accommodate for those different people as they funnel through. So when I worked at Oracle, I would use the term adaptive. I want our marketing to be very adaptive. I want it to be able to cater to different types of people in the revenue function and make sure they're getting the experience that they want.
Tony, the world of sales and marketing actually have a lot more in common than you might think.
Yes. As Chris mentioned, I think, both sales and marketing rely on excellent storytelling skills, but even more so in sales, because you're really trying to convince someone to invest in something when they know it's your job to do so.
I think that really underscores the importance of believing in whatever it is that you're selling, because if your passion and enthusiasm for the product isn't genuine, people might sense that and be less inclined to go through the buy journey with you.
Yeah, and Chris is living proof of this relationship, as he's been on both sides of the equation.
I think it is so interesting that he started his career as a journalist and writer. He's put his skills to good use as a marketer, learning to really tell the story of a brand and the products or services it's selling.
So let's hear more of Chris's insights from his unique CMO perspective. What would you say, now where you are right now, what are some of the current challenges that you're facing with your team, and your day-to-day role, starting from, you're brand new in the middle of this pandemic and you change roles and, a lot of it was not in person. You're doing a lot of things remotely. So what would you say some of the challenges are and how have you really tried to work through them?
Great question. I'd say the biggest challenge in a company like ours, we're growing fast. We're growing at a rate probably that is well above industry standard for a company like ours. But what it does mean for the marketers in seat is that your day is kind of this, you have to run this parallel work stream in your day, which is that on one hand, and it's very similar to our partners in sales. It's like on one hand, we're being asked to hit our numbers, our pipeline goals, all the things that we need to do to contribute to the business. And then in parallel, it's like we need to kind of build this nice, beautiful house that we want to be our dream home for years into the future. And what I mean by that, it's things like building a new website, elevating the brand, updating, and some of these infrastructure and or more glossy initiatives, they themselves are like a massive lift. And then on top of that, you're trying to manage the daily grind of the business. And so for me, the biggest challenge as a CMO, frankly, a lot of my day is sort of, I look at it through the prism of, should I be telling this person to focus a little bit more on the like immediate thing? Or do I have them kind of focus more on this where we want to be type of project? And there are consequences in both directions. It's like you pull them off that, it may have a little bit of impact on some of your day-to-day metrics. But then, when you don't start building the other thing, you're also creating debt for yourself at a different capacity. So
Sure.
I'd say like at a high level, that's our biggest challenge, is like making sure that we're able to balance where we want to go, but also kind of meet the daily demands of the business. I'd also say on the in-person piece, what I've observed with marketing so far is that, like a lot of functions, the pandemic laid bare some things that we don't need to do in person, right? So it's like a lot of things like around budgeting and even media mix planning and some of this other stuff that we do, like it's worked perfectly fine over Zoom. There are two areas of my function that I think have been more constrained remotely. One is the creative aspect. There still is always going to be a part of marketing where the energy of being in a room with other people while you're brainstorming a campaign and whiteboarding and putting your computers and iPads and phones down and really all giving all your attention to each other to an idea. I miss that, and I'm looking forward to that coming back. And
Sure.
The second part I would say is, the BDR, or in some companies they call it SDR function, that rolls up through marketing at Mindtickle. And I think that's a function, and Hannah, I don't know in your experience, like if you would agree, but like I do think that's been a tougher function for remote work in certain cases. Not to say that it can't be done effectively, but I think there's a real energy to that role when you have, a number of BDRs or SDRs kind of sitting in proximity to each other. They're hitting the phones, email all together. They're getting a little bit of that verbal camaraderie and feedback, getting that direct kind of hands-on coaching. I think that, we've, like every company, we've done our best to try to use the virtual tools available to us to make that a thing. But I think that's another area where in-person interaction is super important, and particularly if you look at the hiring profile of those types of reps, like where they are in their career. I think in-person matters a lot there.
That's where the virtual happy hours come in very handy, I think, because
Yes.
You used to do them in person, and now we have to do them
Yeah.
virtual, at least for a little while longer. So maybe that's something
Yeah.
people can consider.
For sure.
Chris had an interesting point about trying to kind of balance everything that's happening and the overarching things that you're working towards, but also trying to meet the demands of the business. And sales are a very demanding business unit. Sales want things immediately, right now, and often justify it by it's an immediate need for a customer who, if you just give me this one thing, it's going to be millions, right? So there's always that kind of dollar value that adds to the urgency. What does that alignment look like for you? What is that sales and marketing alignment like? When you go into an organization, it's approaching a year, you come in, you kind of get a lay of the land. What are the sort of 2 or 3 go-to things that you typically look at or try to work at fixing to create better alignment?
So I think, number one, I like to look at the full spectrum of resources that are made available to sales. So there's sort of the all boats rise stuff, i.e. that would be like your branding, just generally some of your demand programs that you're running and things you're doing to drive revenue for the business, to drive pipeline for the business. So I like to look at the full spectrum of those things, because if I do that, it helps me deal with the case by case stuff in a more thoughtful way. And I think that one of the things that will probably always be the hallmark of any like B2B marketing org that I run is that we go heavy on product marketing investment out of the gate. So, once I joined, not only did we build out sort of new messaging, we then, because we have all these sort of sub solutions in the sales readiness platform, we then built out discrete messaging for all of those as well. So we wanted to provide a tool set with which they could scale up or down appropriately. But first I look at the whole spectrum. It's like, okay, what have we provided? And is that getting us, 80% of what the sellers need in a lot of their deals? And pretty much just work tirelessly till we get there. Because then relative to some of the one-off requests, it makes it a little easier because there's more back and forth that can also happen in that conversation. Well, have you used X, Y, and Z? Yes, I have. And I've used it, and I still am now at this point. Well, by the way, there's more morale on my team is a lot better once they've already been told that stuff they've worked really hard on already got utilized, and we're still at a point where extra help is required. And I manage my team to, frankly, index heavily on supporting sales. And what I do in my role is I look for patterns. If there's stuff where I feel like it's a pattern of this really was available and you just don't wanna, that's a different problem to solve for than there being a meaningful gap. And so number one, I think it's being very clear on the resources that have been made available. Two, I think on sales and marketing alignment, I feel like it's actually having a shared sense of failure. In other words, everyone likes to say that sales and marketing alignment is like a shared success and it's all about closing revenue. That would be like the more popular answer. But I like saying shared sense of failure because in my experience, way more transformational business decisions get made between marketing and sales by looking at your losses and looking at things that didn't go so well. Everywhere I've worked, there are win notices sent out over email. There are win notices sent out over Slack. We don't spend as much time sending out the loss notices and everything that went loss. Like we do win-loss analysis as an example at Mindtickle. But that's less of a public thing for all the different reasons, because some of the stuff you get in those interviews is very candid and you got to be thoughtful about making sure you're not accidentally dressing down someone for something they did or didn't do. But I do think that like having a shared sense of failure and looking at very reflectively across the board what could have been done better in all aspects of the value chain between marketing and sales is super important. And the third piece I would say is I really think it's just important that both stakeholders manage their teams towards walking a mile in the other person's shoes a lot. And I don't feel like that happens enough. I think that, one, I think it's important for marketing to empathize with sales that it is the ultimate what have you done for me lately profession. And there's an incredible pressure to deliver, particularly in an environment like we're at, which is a high growth business. And I think, marketers get prickly with the everyone's a marketer syndrome. I always joke that like everyone thinks they're good at marketing. You always hear these different ideas around like, oh, well, if you just did this, or like another big one for marketers is all the competitor envy stuff. Well, so-and-so did this. And like, so I think that it's super important to realize that, what the other person is going through. And that really can be just an automatic good, like compass going into any kind of interaction that you have between the two departments. I think sales needs to remember that marketing usually has some spectrum of resource it's working with, and it's doing its best to deliver with that resource. And I think marketing also needs to remember that sales is dealing with the cold, hard, brutal realities of the market, which are always going to have some slight misalignment than the academic work that people like me do on addressable market exercises and persona work and all of this stuff. And I think marketers in particular, they don't want to hear it sometimes. But I think that just like they get irritated with people saying that they know all about what should be good marketing, I think they need to be careful about not presupposing that they know exactly always what great selling looks like. And that's
Chris, say that again.
that's like kind of
Say that
unnerving,
last
frankly, like for the marketers that work for me. Sometimes it's unnerving for them to know that I feel that way, but
Yeah.
that is how I feel.
I love
So,
the transparency.
being someone on the sales side, it's refreshing to hear that, right? Especially the alignment pieces, right? I think there's within an organization, if you really do want to have a well-oiled machine, you do have to have that alignment between both sales and marketing. What do you think really are the key responsibilities for marketing in the sales process versus what sales might necessarily need or think they might need to do?
Mm-hmm. So I think the primary responsibility of marketing is to identify the addressable market, have a really cohesive strategy from a targeting perspective, from a content perspective, from an experience perspective of how to go and reach that target in market. And frankly, place some bets on what you think the majority of those people are missing in their current roles and actually need to see addressed in what they're doing. So I think that's very much on marketing's purview. I think there's all the classical stuff that has been written about to death, which is all true, right? That, more of the buying decision happens before anyone ever talks to a salesperson. I think that's all true, but I also feel that it's important for marketing to bring some point of view to those interactions. It's not just enough to say, well, we think this target will be interested in sales coaching, so we'll develop a white paper and a webinar around sales coaching. Like, you can do anything to generate keywords and get the machines to notice you in some way. But I think that it is on marketing to also come with a unique point of view that they are seeding in the mind of that prospect. So that way, sales's goal really is to get in there and take that seed that's been planted and start getting really prescriptive about the strategy and what would be involved in bringing that to life at a company. So for me, that's sort of where the division of labor is. Marketing is it's like that inception of sort of planting the idea. And then it's the seller's job to sort of bring it to life, start getting into all of the nuance that exists inside of these companies. If we're talking about B2B, which we are, right? Like, I think that one thing that is important for sales to remember is, like, when marketing is building these strategies, there is a point where they just have to plan for what works most of the time as our conversation here, because they're trying to reach a more mass audience. Even with all the data tools and the targeting and personalization and all this stuff, if people are being completely honest with you, there's still some level of malleability that you have to have in some of your messaging if you want to reach some of these audiences. So then it's really on sales to kind of take it that level deeper, that is really going to make the value and the insight, like I use that word, super clear in the mind of the buyer. That's sort of how I look at the breakdown.
So Chris, we've spent some time, talking about your history, really understanding your superpowers, and more importantly, looking closely when it comes to inside the business, how you can start to create alignment between sales and marketing. Now, I'd really love to get your perspective on one of the things that you're excited about when it comes to technology, the different things that are happening in the world that are going to drive and revolutionize marketing and sales over the next 2 to 5 years.
So I think one of the greatest things that is going to revolutionize the B2B marketing industry is the revenue technology and the sales technology stack catching up. And chief revenue officers, chief sales officers, whatever senior sales title you can imagine, is going to start leaning harder into a more digitally focused way of doing business. I feel that revenue technology is in a similar space right now where you have sort of this smattering of different providers that are solving the sales productivity and performance challenge from different angles. But we're going to see more consolidation of that functionality coming together. But I also think that that's going to be an extraordinary thing for marketing. As more of the sales process kind of comes out of the shadows and gets brought into the digital realm, I think that's going to put more context behind the data that we've sorely been missing for a long time. That's the revolution that's going to happen, is revenue technology is going to catch up. And the last point I just make is CMOs, coming into the 2000s, they always wanted to just hang their hat on the next brand campaign, the next tagline. That's going to be my thing. And then they realized that actually I have to be potentially the most digitally first organization. And what did we see? We saw all this spend that was going towards CIOs start to move over to CMOs. I think the same thing is happening with the chief revenue officers. I think what's happening is they're realizing that, just relying on sales ops and or IT to manage all my technology is probably not good enough. And I think that is going to be a massive change that you see in that leadership role and change, is that they're going to have to start leaning into this stuff in a way that CMOs did 10 years ago.
So Chris, this has been a great conversation. We learned a lot. I think what we want to do is we're going to put your CMO superpowers to work one last time. Okay. We're going to go through a very quick rapid fire round of questions. So you're going to have to sharpen those skills real quick. We're going to give you a couple questions. Hannah's going to go first, then I'll pop in. We're going to do these real fast as we go through them, but we'll have some fun with it. And Hannah, go ahead and kick it off.
Okay, so what's the best piece of advice you've been given in your career?
I worked with a gentleman named Chandar Padabiram. He's now the CMO of Coupa Software. Before that, he was CMO of Marketo, so not exactly a lightweight. And he said, we are always going to perceive ourselves in a slightly different way than everyone else perceives us. The best you can do is minimize the number of clicks you are away.
What would you say is your top productivity hack?
You got to wake up early. I can certainly say that as a CMO. Like if you don't utilize the hours of 6 to 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. effectively, I don't see how you get through your day.
Good. Top prediction for the sales industry this year?
I think more noise and more consolidation.
If you could share a piece of advice to all marketers, what would that be?
My advice would be make sure to remember that your ideas matter. It's not simply enough to message value. You need to message insight.
Where do you go to get your industry news?
So, a little bit of everywhere. I'm maybe just because I'm a little bit of a sentimentalist for some of my early days in the Valley, I still read TechCrunch quite a bit. And I also read a lot of the digital stuff on the Wall Street Journal. And then generally just sort of a smattering. Like I set up the feeds where I'm watching specific companies, and then I'm sort of kind of plugging through and looking at the different news outlets that are covering them. So those are primary for me. And then I get all my regular news primarily from the New York Times.
Okay, so in the theme of reading, what book has inspired you the most in your career?
Malcolm Gladwell's Blink has still stuck with me all these years later. I'm sure there's a lot in that book now that has probably been refuted as pseudoscience in a number of different constructs, but I think that I think through so much in my life around sort of like initial impressions and reactions to things and how much that shapes you and how much it shapes a lot of your business relationships. And so, I mean, that book is probably 20 years old now, but that one has stuck with me this whole time.
So I'm going to throw one last question in. We're going to go from books to movies, since you brought movies up earlier. And this is a question we had asked the previous guest on the podcast, but which term would you use? Always be closing or sell me this pen?
Sell me this pen.
That is the correct answer. Chris, thanks so much for your time here on the podcast today. It was a pleasure for Hannah and I to have you on, and we're looking forward to seeing what you do at Mindtickle.
Thank you. Thank you both.
So, Hannah, I've had more positions than I care to reveal over the course of my career, but I've worked with a number of different marketing people, some good, some not as good. But I think there's been a bunch that I've worked with that have done an excellent job in really setting up and driving awareness. I've been at some companies that were very much early on in the beginning of their fields, where you were doing a lot of evangelizing, right? Having to go out and really make sure that people really get a first understanding of what the product is or what the solution is that we were delivering. So I think the best marketers that I've worked with have really done a phenomenal job of really getting the name out there and the brand out there, and making sure that the customers had a good sense of what it is that we could do, but more importantly, the value that we could provide. Does that ring true to what you've experienced with any of the marketing teams you've worked with?
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I've worked again. I've had many roles in my over my sales career, and I have definitely been part of organizations where marketing. Put it this way, I haven't known what they're doing. I just don't know. I'm like, man, like, are you here? Do you still work here? What are you working on? And that has worried me. And I've been in situations as a salesperson where I've been like, if I say something, am I going to get in trouble? Because I haven't heard from marketing. I don't know what they're doing. I'm confused. So they're
developing tchotchkes is what they're doing. They're getting nice pens and shirts and things like that, I think.
I'm like, huh? However, I've also been in environments where it's both small and large organizations where marketing, they are all over you. They're like, here's a campaign. This is what we're doing. Here's the script. Here's the value prop. Present it to us. Walk us through a demonstration. Here's what you should be talking about. Here's the campaign that's going out. Here's the dates. We're going to send you a list of people who have opened the email, clicked on the email. We're going to show you all of their web activity. And you're like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. So you've got people, marketing people who, I think there's two distinctions. You've got marketing people, and I'm definitely going to lose followers when I finish talking about this. But you're going to have some marketers who are like, my job is to make money for the company. That's it. And you're going to have other marketers who are saying, I am here to drive leads. And I think there's just a really fine line. And when the whole business, that revenue org isn't thinking about numbers, that's where I see things start to break down, because you're thinking you're doing a great job, but there's no numbers. So, that's my 2 pence or cents.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't need a huge marketing team in order to have success, right? I've been at some smaller organizations that just had phenomenal people that were very crisp in their messaging. They were very precise and knew how to target the right people at the right time with the right information, right? And that's why sales and marketing are so intertwined, right? Because the outcomes and goals that they're looking for aren't really that dissimilar. It's just really a slightly different approach in what they're looking to do. So to me, the most or the best people I've really worked with were the ones that were really smart in the way they thought about things and could execute at a higher level to really drive, that that retention, that information level that people are really looking for. Hannah, I'm a movie guy, as you know, so telling a good story is always very important. But in sales, telling a good story about your brand relies on having a strong belief in the company's overall vision and mission. I agree with Chris that to optimize sales outcomes and effectiveness, sales and marketing each need to build a team full of passionate people who can really get behind the product.
I mean, Chris, he even emphasized the importance of being truthful and direct as marketers, especially when working directly with the sales team.
Exactly. And we all appreciate honesty when working with others, but if you really want to get in a salesperson's good books, it's important to be upfront about overall performance and any challenges you may be dealing with.
There's a way to get into a salesperson's good books?
Maybe.
But honestly, remaining adaptable and flexible to change is really essential, especially in today's rapidly evolving world.
Exactly. Being able to help your customers solve problems as they crop up will help you build relationships founded on trust, credibility, and a problem-solving attitude.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Ready, Set, Sell.
We hope you took away some valuable lessons and insights that inspire you to reevaluate your approach to sales readiness.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show when you get a minute.
And stay tuned for the next episode of Ready, Set, Sell.